Right now, more than 100 federal agents, as we just teased, on the ground in downtown L.A., raiding several businesses, going after drug dealing, gangs, the homelessness crisis all around the controversial MacArthur Park area. As you see,
I can show you the seizure had 198 kilograms of counterfeit fentanyl pills, which is approximately 1.7 million pills, 12 kilograms of fentanyl powder, and 2.5 pounds.
This didn't begin with a bunker. It began with a shipping container in Newark. A refrigerated unit, listed as medical equipment, sat untouched for 9 hours behind a chain-link fence at Port Newark. The paperwork was clean. The seals were intact. The company name checked out. But when a K-9 unit walked past the container, the dog didn't bark. It froze. That was the first sign something was wrong. By the time federal agents opened the doors, they weren't looking at medicine. They were looking at vacuum-sealed bricks hidden behind temperature-controlled blood storage cabinets. And buried inside the shipment was a tiny metal tag. Not a tracking device. A name. Whitcomb. At first, nobody in the field office knew what it meant. But 11 days later, that same name would lead the FBI, ICE, DEA, and DOJ to a private Doomsday bunker outside Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And inside it, they would find $4.7 billion in cash, 12 tons of narcotics, encrypted servers, passports, gold bars, and a private escape tunnel built beneath a mountain estate owned by one of the richest men in America. His name was Calvin Whitcomb. On paper, he was a philanthropist. In private, federal investigators believed he had built one of the most protected criminal systems in the country. And the most disturbing part was this. The bunker wasn't built to hide from the end of the world. It was built to survive the collapse of his own empire. Calvin Whitcomb was the kind of billionaire people described with soft words. Visionary, private, generous, complicated. He owned logistics companies, private equity firms, farmland in 3 states, and medical supply distributors that had exploded in value during national shortages. He funded university research. He donated to disaster relief. He appeared once a year at a charity gala in Miami, said almost nothing, and disappeared before dessert. No scandals. No messy interviews. No loud enemies. Which made the Newark container even stranger. Because when agents traced the medical equipment company on the manifest, they found it belonged to a layered corporate structure connected to a Delaware holding company connected to a trust connected to a fund that had once received investment from Whitcomb Strategic Holdings. Not direct enough for an arrest, but too direct to ignore. So the FBI didn't move. They watched. That decision would change everything. For 3 weeks, agents from Newark, Miami, Houston, and Denver began comparing old seizures that had never fully made sense. A truck stopped outside El Paso with fentanyl hidden inside hospital beds. A Miami warehouse with counterfeit pharmaceuticals behind legitimate surgical kits. A private airstrip in rural Kansas used by aircraft that filed clean flight plans but landed with unusual weight changes. Each case looked separate. Different companies, different drivers, different routes. But the same pattern kept appearing. Medical logistics. Disaster relief contracts, cold chain transport, and again, buried in shell companies, coded invoices or encrypted shipment notes, one word kept surfacing. Whitcomb. The early theory was simple. Maybe one of Whitcomb's companies had been infiltrated. Maybe cartel-linked distributors were using his supply chain without his knowledge. That was the clean version. The version everyone wanted to believe. Then a junior financial analyst at the FBI's New York field office noticed something that didn't fit. A small private security contractor in Montana had been billing one of Whitcomb's companies every month for environmental protection services. The payments were huge. Too huge. Over 4 years, the contractor had received $286 million. But it had no public clients, no visible office staff, no major equipment records, and no environmental projects. It had one listed address. A converted dental office in Bozeman. When agents visited, the building was empty except for dust, old carpet, and one locked filing cabinet. Inside were paper invoices for concrete reinforcement, air filtration systems, industrial water storage, blast doors, satellite uplinks, underground generators, biometric scanners, and something labeled only as Level 7 containment. That was when the investigation shifted. They were no longer looking at a logistics case. They were looking for a bunker. The first visual confirmation came from satellite imagery. Not from some dramatic spy feed. Just a quiet comparison of property records, construction permits, and aerial photos across 3 years. Whitcomb owned a 14,000-acre ranch northwest of Jackson Hole through a land trust called Gray Mesa Preserve. Publicly, it was described as a conservation retreat, but satellite images showed construction vehicles entering a restricted access road at night. Heavy trucks came in without visible building permits. Soil was removed, then covered. A hillside changed shape. A service road appeared, then vanished under planted trees. One image showed a rectangular shadow at the base of a cliff. The next month, it was gone. Not demolished, concealed. Federal agents began calling it the Mountain Door. Still, they needed more. A billionaire's private property was not enough. A suspicious road was not enough. A fake contractor was not enough. Then ICE Homeland Security investigations intercepted a message from a freight broker in Laredo. The message was only 7 words. Cold rooms full. Move reserve to Chapel. Nobody knew what Chapel meant until DEA analysts compared that phrase to older encrypted chats taken from cartel-linked couriers in Phoenix. In those messages, Chapel meant a protected storage site. A place nobody touched. A place above the bosses. A place where product waited when the normal routes got too hot. The bunker had a nickname. The Chapel. But what made the case darker was not just the drugs. It was the people moving them. In Salt Lake City, a 29-year-old truck driver named Luis Benitez had been arrested after agents found 300 pounds of synthetic opioids inside a refrigerated medical trailer. At first, he looked like another courier. Then investigators read his phone. Luis had been told he was transporting emergency dialysis equipment. His wife had cancer. He had taken the route because the company offered a $9,000 bonus if he drove overnight and asked no questions at way stations. He had never met Whitcomb. He had never seen the drugs. But if the shipment had reached Chicago, federal prosecutors believed it could have fed thousands of street-level transactions in less than a week. Luis became one of the first human cracks in the system. Not a mastermind, not a villain. A disposable piece. And there were hundreds like him. Drivers, warehouse temps, customs brokers, security guards, nurses hired to sign inventory forms, people who thought they were working inside a legitimate emergency supply network, never realizing the paperwork itself had been weaponized. That was the brilliance of the system. It didn't look like crime from the outside. It looked like infrastructure. By the 4th month, the task force had grown. FBI handled racketeering and financial crimes. ICE traced cross-border movement. DEA mapped narcotics flow. DOJ prepared the sealed warrants. And all of it centered on one question. Was Calvin Whitcomb merely protected by the system? Or had he built it? The answer came from a place nobody expected. A wellness clinic in Scottsdale. The clinic catered to executives, athletes, and wealthy clients who paid cash for longevity treatment. On its own, it barely mattered. But one of its doctors had been filing unusual pharmaceutical orders through a Whitcomb medical distributor. The quantities made no sense. Too much sedative inventory. Too many precursor chemicals. Too many controlled substances listed as loss replacements. When agents executed a quiet subpoena, they discovered the clinic's back office had a private server room. Not large. Just 3 racks, chilled by a portable cooling unit, locked behind a door marked Records Archive. Inside the server racks, technicians found encrypted backups from shipping databases, and one folder had not been properly wiped. Its title was simple. Chapel_ledger. The ledger did not contain street names or cartel slang. It looked like corporate accounting. Routes, risk ratings, port exposure, law enforcement pressure, bribe estimates, loss tolerance, mortality projections. That last one stopped the room cold. Mortality projections. Not for workers, for customers. The system had calculated deaths as a cost of doing business. That was the moment several investigators later described as the emotional turn in the case. Before that, it had been money, drugs, shell companies, and logistics. After that, it became something else. Because the ledger showed that overdoses in certain cities had been tracked like market performance. Baltimore, Cleveland, St. Louis, Phoenix, Portland. When deaths rose, prices changed. When seizures increased, shipments moved. When a local task force tightened one route, another opened through a medical supply distributor with emergency clearance. Every tragedy became data. Every community became a market. And above it all was a user account with executive permissions. CW01. Calvin Whitcomb. Still, federal prosecutors knew defense attorneys would attack every connection. They needed a witness from inside the mountain operation. They found one in Denver. Her name was Mara Voss. She had worked for Whitcomb Strategic Holdings as a crisis infrastructure consultant. Her resume was perfect: military logistics, private security, disaster planning, executive protection. Officially, she helped ultra-wealthy clients prepare for pandemics, cyber attacks, civil unrest, and supply chain collapse. Unofficially, agents believed she designed the movement protocols that kept Whitcomb's hidden network alive. When the FBI approached her, she refused to talk. Then they showed her photos from the Scottsdale server room. Not the ledgers. Not the money. One image. A scanned authorization file bearing her digital signature beside a shipment that later killed 18 people in Ohio. Mara stared at it for nearly a minute. Then she asked for a lawyer. 2 days later, she began cooperating. And what she told investigators changed the entire shape of the case. According to Mara, the bunker had 3 purposes. First, storage. Second, command. Third, evacuation. The underground site was not just a vault. It was a nerve center. It had independent power, filtered air, private satellite communications, underground loading bays, biometric entry points, and living quarters for 42 people. It could operate for 18 months without outside resupply. But the strangest part was Level 7. Mara said Level 7 was not below the main bunker. It was behind it. A sealed wing accessible through a hidden service corridor, designed to protect documents, cash reserves, hard drives, and sensitive leverage files. When agents asked what leverage files meant, Mara's face changed. She said, the people who made him untouchable. That was the mid-twist. Whitcomb's empire was not protected by secrecy alone. It was protected by compromise. Mara claimed the bunker contained recordings, contracts, financial transfers, private communications, and surveillance files involving port officials, corporate executives, foreign brokers, security contractors, and at least 2 people with indirect access to federal procurement systems. Not federal agents taking bags of cash in parking lots. Something cleaner. Consulting contracts, speaking fees, phantom retainers, charity donations, family trusts, internship placements. The kind of corruption that doesn't look like corruption until every piece is on the table. That created a new problem. If agents moved too early, the files could disappear. If they waited too long, the drugs could move. Then, on a Thursday night, a confidential sensor placed near the ranch road detected a convoy entering the property. 4 trucks. No headlights for the final stretch. Thermal images showed men unloading rectangular pallets near the mountain door. The next morning, financial monitors flagged large transfers leaving 3 offshore accounts tied to Whitcomb's network. The chapel was being cleaned out. The DOJ made the call. The raid would happen before dawn. At 5:18 a.m., the first federal vehicles rolled through the outer ranch gate. Not with sirens. Not with helicopters first. Quietly. A line of armored SUVs, tactical vans, evidence trucks, and medical support units moved across the frozen access road under a sky just beginning to turn gray. At the estate's main residence, agents detained private security with minimal resistance. But at the mountain entrance, everything changed. The visible cliff face looked natural. Rock, pine, snow. Then an FBI breaching team located the seam Mara had described. A disguised steel door hidden beneath a retractable rock panel. The first attempt to open it failed. The second triggered an internal lockdown. For 11 minutes, nobody knew whether evidence inside was being destroyed. Then a power technician cut into a buried auxiliary line, and the mountain door released with a low mechanical groan. Behind it was not a cave. It was a tunnel wide. Enough for a box truck. White walls, floor drains, security cameras. A painted stripe running down the concrete like a hospital corridor. The deeper agents went, the less it felt like a bunker, and the more it felt like a private underground city. The first storage chamber held cash. Not stacks in duffel bags. Pallets. Vacuum-sealed bricks of U.S. currency packed in industrial crates labeled as water filtration components. A forensic accountant on scene gave the first rough estimate at $900 million. Then they opened the second chamber. Then the third. By the end of the initial count, the estimated total had reached $4.7 billion. And the money was only the beginning. Behind a locked cold storage bay, DEA agents found narcotics packed by category, purity, route, and destination. Fentanyl, cocaine, methamphetamine, pressed pills, precursor chemicals. The final seizure weight would be listed as approximately 12 tons. 12 tons hidden under a billionaire's private mountain. One agent later said the most surreal moment was not the drugs. It was the neatness. Everything was labeled. Everything had a barcode. Everything looked less like a cartel stash house and more like an Amazon warehouse built for death. Then came the second cinematic discovery. Level 7. Agents found the entrance behind a false wall in a mechanical room. The panel opened only after technicians located a biometric override hidden inside a fire suppression cabinet. The door was matte black. No handle. No markings. Inside were rows of servers, fireproof safes, hard copy ledgers, foreign passports, cryptocurrency cold wallets, gold bars, and a wall of labeled hard drives. Each hard drive had a name. Not code names, real names. That room became the heart of the prosecution. Because it showed the system was bigger than drugs. It showed a private criminal economy built on logistics, influence, fear, and insurance. Whitcomb had not just moved narcotics. He had built a marketplace for protected movement. If a cartel needed product moved through a port, his network could do it. If a corrupt broker needed cash parked, his network could do it. If an executive needed a paper trail erased, his network could do it. If a shipment disappeared, losses were calculated. If someone talked, leverage was activated. And if the whole structure ever collapsed, Whitcomb had a bunker where he could vanish behind cash, passports, satellite links, and enough supplies to outlast the storm. But he never made it there. Calvin Whitcomb was arrested 900 miles away in Palm Beach. Not in a panic room. Not on a runway. at a private medical suite, where he was reportedly preparing for a minor procedure under an assumed scheduling name. When agents entered, he did not shout. He did not run. He simply asked, which office signed the warrant? That question stayed with investigators. Not what is this about? Not there must be a mistake. Which office? As if he already knew the day would come. As if the only surprise was who had finally moved first. The indictment that followed was massive. Racketeering conspiracy. Drug trafficking conspiracy. Money laundering. Obstruction. Importation violations. Conspiracy to corrupt public processes. Financial crimes tied to shell entities across multiple states. The DOJ press conference used careful language. Prosecutors avoided dramatic claims they couldn't yet prove in court. They emphasized evidence, ongoing charges, and the presumption of innocence. But behind the scenes, investigators were still processing the bunker. Because the Chapel files pointed outward. To port access. To procurement loopholes. To medical distribution fraud. To shell charities. To private security contractors. To executives who had attended Whitcomb's fundraisers and later received consulting payments from companies nobody could explain. The raid did not close the case. It opened 63 new ones. And that is where the human impact became impossible to ignore. In Cleveland, a mother named Denise Harrow had lost her 22-year-old son to counterfeit pills that looked like prescription medication. For months, she blamed one dealer, one bad night, one mistake. Then federal victim coordinators told her the pills were linked to a route moving through Whitcomb's medical logistics network. Her son had not died because of one reckless street transaction. He had died inside a supply chain. A spreadsheet somewhere had anticipated people like him. That detail devastated her. Because it meant his death had not been accidental in the way she had imagined. It had been priced in. In Houston, investigators found another thread. A warehouse employee named Billionaire had reported suspicious pallets months before the raid. She sent photos to a supervisor, questioning why medical relief shipments had no hospital destination codes. 3 days later, she was fired for performance inconsistency. After the raid, those same pallet markings appeared in evidence photos from the bunker. Priya had seen the edge of the machine, and the machine pushed her out. Stories like hers turned the case from a billionaire scandal into something larger. Because Whitcomb's network survived by using trust as camouflage. Hospitals trust medical distributors. Ports trust sealed shipments. Drivers trust manifests. Employees trust supervisors. Communities trust that disaster relief means help, not harm. The entire system worked because every layer looked normal to the person standing inside it. That was the final realization. The bunker was not the secret. The normal-looking world above it was. The clean invoices. The polite emails, the charity boards, the emergency contracts, the refrigerated trucks, the private security badges, the smiling photos beside hospital wings and scholarship checks. All of it formed a surface so ordinary that nobody wanted to imagine what might be moving underneath. And that is why the raid mattered. Not because agents found cash. Not because they found drugs. Not even because they found a billionaire hiding behind blast doors and shell companies. It mattered because it revealed a truth investigators had suspected for years but rarely saw so clearly. Modern criminal empires do not always look like gangs. Sometimes they look like logistics firms. Sometimes they look like philanthropy. Sometimes they look like emergency preparedness. Sometimes the most dangerous people in the system never touch the product, never stand near the border, never carry a weapon, and never meet the victims. They build distance. Then they monetize it. Calvin Whitcomb's defense team would later argue that he was a distant investor, that rogue executives abused his companies, that the bunker was for family safety, that the cash came from private transactions, that the ledgers were misinterpreted, that the files were planted or distorted. That is what trials are for. Evidence would be tested. Witnesses would be challenged. Documents would be pulled apart line by line. But the image that stayed with the public was simpler. A hidden door in a Wyoming mountain. A billionaire's name on a federal warrant. $4.7 billion in cash. 12 tons of drugs. And a private underground command center built beneath a ranch most people thought was just another rich man's retreat. By the time agents finished cataloging the first wave of evidence, one veteran prosecutor reportedly stood outside the mountain entrance and said, "This is not a bunker case. This is a mirror." Because the chapel showed what happens when money, secrecy, infrastructure, and influence merge into one machine. It showed how harm can be hidden behind paperwork, how corruption can wear a suit, how a system can be designed so every person inside it knows only enough to keep moving, but never enough to stop. And somewhere between the cash pallets, the cold rooms, the servers, and the names on those hard drives, the investigation stopped being about one billionaire. It became about the question nobody in power wanted asked too loudly. How many other systems are operating in plain sight because they look too legitimate to suspect?